Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
We absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law.
We need to safeguard financial stability.
2024 is not going to be an easy year.
We used to call it the dream of home ownership, but look at Britain now.
We've got to hang on to optimism and hope because it is the biggest driver of change.
Let's stop thinking of life in terms of Brexit. Let's move on and look for the future.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden.
Antisemitism. Well, Lizzy, we've documented Labour's struggles over a number of years with this issue. Since 2020, Keir Starmer's tried to make a clean break from Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the party. But in the past few days, with fighting still going on between Israel and Hamas, Starmer has found himself dealing with another incident of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party ranks. Now he's been forced to withdraw support from Azhar Ali, the Labour candidate in the upcoming Rochdale by-election, after Ali's anti-Semitic remarks that were made last year and that resurfaced.
Now look, Ali apologised for suggesting Israel deliberately allowed the October 7th attacks to happen, but then further revelations about his comments meant he's been suspended from the Labour Party pending an investigation. The revelations really mark the ugly return of anti-Semitism to the forefront of Labour politics, and they kind of threatened to undo the efforts by Keir Starmer to prove that Labour's fixed its relations with the Jewish community in Britain. At last year's party conference, we spoke to the former Labour MP Luciana Berger. She'd just returned to the Labour Party after her decision to leave under Corbyn in protest at what she called the party's failure to combat anti-Semitism. And here's what she had to say when we spoke to her last October, just days after the attack on Israel by Hamas. We asked her whether the party had done enough to win back Jewish voters.
There's been so much that's done, and it's exceeded my expectations. So I rejoined the party in March of this year when the Labour Party was taken out of special measures that had been imposed on it by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, when they investigated the Labour Party and found that under the previous leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party had breached the Equality Act and had been found guilty of the victimisation and harassment of its Jewish members. That was very dark findings, and the party had a big job to do to turn that around. And to Keir Starmer's credit and his leadership, a lot has been done, and enough was done to take the party out of special measures. Now, I'm not complacent, and I don't think that's, tick all of job has been done, but certainly this conference that I'm at here today in Liverpool in 2023 is incomparable to the conference that I experienced when I was last here 5 years ago in 2018.
So that was the former Labour MP Luciana Berger there speaking to us in October of last year at the Labour Party conference. Lizzy and I, that was quite an optimistic and more hopeful Luciana Berger, and you heard a clear feeling that Starmer was on the right path, that he was regaining the trust of the Jewish community. So one might ask why we're back here. Joining us to discuss is Bloomberg senior UK government reporter Alex Wickham. Good morning, Alex. Just tell us the sequence of events then and exactly what happened with the Rochdale by-election candidate.
So this all started on Sunday when the Mail on Sunday newspaper published a story revealing that this candidate, Azhar Ali in Rochdale, had, as a comment of the local Labour Party in the weeks after the October 7th attack in Israel, suggested that Israel had allowed the attack to happen as a pretext for it to invade Gaza. So essentially pushed a conspiracy theory that Israel was sort of pulling the strings behind the whole thing. Now, he immediately apologised. Labour came out and said, look, this is out of character. We think he's an ally of the Jewish community. We've never seen him say anything like this before. So we're standing by him. That was their line all the way through Monday until the Daily Mail went to the Labour Party again with further comments that they'd obtained through a recording of this meeting, where he seemed to blame Jewish people, as he put it in the media, for the suspension of a pro-Palestine Labour MP over comments that they had made, which for the Labour Party was too far, and they suspended him as their candidate, essentially meaning that Labour doesn't have a candidate in this Rochdale by-election now, and bringing anti-Semitism right back to the front of Keir Starmer's agenda.
Oh, feels like Groundhog Day. Well, in a moment, we're going to speak to Martin Forde KC. He was charged by Keir Starmer with investigating this whole issue of anti-Semitism under his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. And Alex, you've tracked the Labour anti-Semitism issue over many years. Just put into context for us, would you, Forde's report and the response to it?
Well, the Forde report was looking into these sort of really deep-seated problems that the Labour Party had through in the context of its handling of anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn, but also bringing in sort of factional warfare in the party, bullying, other forms of racism, and really, just generally pretty bad behaviour all round through the structures of the Labour Party, and trying to see how those could be improved. Now, I don't think anybody would argue that Keir Starmer hasn't made improvements to the Labour Party in this area, as we heard from Luciana Berger there. But clearly there is work to do, and this is really the last thing that Keir Starmer wants to happen in an election year, is for this issue to come up again and cast doubt over the Labour Party.
Alex, stay there. We're going to come back to you in a moment, but we'll continue this conversation because Martin Forde KC joins us now to discuss what's been happening with the Labour Party. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio, and thank you so much for your time. So you heard a little bit from Alex, his perspective on your report. I'm sure you'll give us many more details. But firstly, I just want to understand your perspective on what has happened. Anti-Semitism, is it still clearly a problem for the Labour Party as far as you're concerned?
I think anti-Semitism is a problem nationwide, and I think the problem with those who regard themselves as left-leaning often is that they don't examine their attitudes. They think suggesting that they're left of centre means that they're almost immune from any criticism around anti-Semitism or any other form of racism, and that simply can't be the case. I think what concerns me about this particular case is that this gentleman was being recorded surreptitiously and no doubt thought he was in a safe space. And that's where I've certainly found in my personal experience that when people think they're among like-minded people, reveal their true colours. So I think that's what would disturb me the most. Having said that, I do think the current leader has done extremely well to get an element of the Jewish community back on side, and obviously one wants Jewish members of the party to feel they're in a safe space, but there are still concerns that there can be differences of treatment when this issue arises in terms of the actions of the party. So I was very interested that JLM and the Board of Jewish Deputies understood why the party might back that candidate. It was close to the election. He couldn't be changed. But I would contrast that, for instance, with the length of time it's taken for the Diane Abbott position to be resolved. That occurred last April. And of course, we've recently had an incident with Kate Ossamore as well. And there are definitely those within the party that have contacted me that feel that the treatment is still factional rather than transparent and consistent.
So could Keir Starmer have handled the Azhar Ali case better?
I think it's really difficult, this. I mean, I've never been a leader of a political party, and you can't expect a leader to micromanage absolutely everything. But, you're very dependent upon the quality of your advice, your communications team, your policy advisors. To my mind, because of the historical issues, it was probably unwise to think that a swift apology, given the appalling nature of the comments that was made, would make this issue go away. And also, to my mind, and I'm not a politician, the Daily Mail's never been a friend of the Labour Party, and one of the ways of kind of perpetuating a sting is to drip feed the information. And I'm just slightly surprised that they didn't think, well, this is the first line of the story, they've probably got more. I dare say they're very much regretting that they didn't take the action they've taken very recently, immediately.
So it speaks to Keir Starmer's political judgment, which is something that Rishi Sunak too has been criticised for.
Yeah, well, whether it's political judgment or whether it's the quality of advice, as I've said, there are 2 by-elections this week. He's probably busy campaigning. They're obviously potentially an imminent election, a manifesto to get together. But one would have hoped that somebody within the organisation would have thought this needs to be nipped in the bud, and alarm bells are going to ring. We've done so well. We've made so much progress, and this could set us back a great deal, because that's why you're talking to me about it. And I'm sure he'd much rather people were talking about policies than this issue.
Well, and I mean, you today have talked about Keir Starmer's response to this as being a shambles. I mean, the comments from the MP were an out-and-out anti-Semitic sort of conspiracy. In some ways, is it not problematic that the report that you did into anti-Semitism, but also the kind of wider how the Labour Party sort of operates and responds to racism and issues within the party, 154 out of your 165 recommendations, the party says that they have enacted, but it didn't work in this case. And surely investigations should have been a bit more thorough in what is a hugely important year, as you say, for a general election and this by-election.
I mean, there are 11 that weren't enacted. Some of those are ones which we were hoping the party would deal with to try and remove a factional element from the disciplinary process. I think...
So basically the 11 that were not included, the ones that were missing, are the most important bits of the report that Keir Starmer did not enact?
I wouldn't say they were necessarily the most important bits, but there's always a balance in any regulatory system between cost and effectiveness and proportionality. And we were probably setting up quite a gold standard. But I was concerned that the way in which some of these cases are investigated and the length of time they take was something that we wanted to try through recommendations to add a bit of impetus to. So again, if I go back to Diane Abbott case, that blew up in April. I think within minutes, if not hours, she'd apologised. She still has the whip withdrawn. Here we are in February. The gentleman in Rochdale apologised and was immediately backed. And there's certainly concerns about factional treatment. And I heard one of Jeremy Corbyn's advisors saying, well, if this gentleman had been seen as being on the left of the party, he'd been left languishing. But because he's on the right, he got the immediate support. Now, I don't know how true that is, but it was certainly the perception of many of the people I spoke to in the course of the inquiry that you didn't get equal and consistent treatment depending upon which faction you were identified with.
Okay, well,
and what we were trying to do.
On the point of inconsistency, you've accused Labour of, and I'm quoting, in effect, operating a hierarchy of racism or of discrimination. Is that still the case?
Well, again, I'm a lawyer, so I chose my words quite carefully. I said there was a perception. We had 1,100 submissions at the time when the membership was about 500,000, so it's difficult to quantify. But what I felt the party needed to be aware of was that a number of their activists and members felt that certain types of allegations of discrimination were not investigated as rigorously and as swiftly as others. And the major contrast seemed to be between anti-Semitism and misogyny versus other types of discrimination, whether that be anti-Black or anti-Asian discrimination, where we had many, many complaints and submissions. Clearly, they're a self-selecting group, so I can't tell you how representative they are, but we were at desperate pains to make the party aware of the fact that there was perceived to be a hierarchy of protected characteristics.
Is this part of a wider issue around identity politics? If everything comes down to race, gender, sexual orientation or any other particular grouping, it then does become harder to look at policies if everything is divided into factions and tribes based only on those sort of attributes.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think one of the problems, I mean, social media is, kind of the megaphone that enhances these differences as well. I've never ceased to be amazed at how little people really know about those that they criticise. I mean, I know that lots of people who describe somebody as a Zionist have no idea what Zionism is. It's not necessarily pejorative. Equally, there are issues with people not understanding that those of the Jewish faith also have a separate ethnic identity. But equally, one of the things that concerned me was that there must be a space in which you could be critical of Israeli politics or political decisions without being rendered automatically anti-Semitic. To me, it's a bit like, my saying that I thought Robert Mugabe was a poor leader of Zimbabwe, and somebody saying, well, that makes you immediately an anti-black racist. And these are difficult spaces to navigate. And I think, you do need strong guidance. And the party needs, I think, to kind of grasp this nettle and say, these are tropes, these are unacceptable, this is the education we expect you to undergo, this is the information that we're giving you to make sure that you don't, whether deliberately or inadvertently, fall into these traps. I mean, I have to say I was astonished that it was said that this gentleman had been the victim of a conspiracy theory. One would hope that you have a caliber of candidate that would be able to work out truth from fiction, or at least, as I know you journalists have to do, to second source things. This was a wicked conspiracy that I think I first heard of probably the following day. In my mind, I completely dismissed it. But I said I wasn't particularly impressed with the nature of the apology, which then led to the support either.
Well, this feels, as I said, a bit like Groundhog Day. The issue doesn't seem to go away. How can Keir Starmer move on and put this in the rearview mirror? Can he, when you've got the Israel-Gaza war going on?
Again, I mean, as I said, I'm not a politician. It's not for me really to advise him. I came in as an independent reporter. I think that it's really difficult. You can't please all of the people all of the time. They're clearly those of Palestinian heritage or with links to Palestine who feel that he should be calling for a ceasefire rather than a pause. And there's this huge issue about, what is reasonable self-defense. These are difficult things to negotiate. But our concern when we were writing the report was there didn't seem to be any room for respectful debate. Everything gets really polarized. And I just think there needs to be a great deal more maturity. People can agree to disagree, but they can do so respectfully. And it just seems, as I said, and social media doesn't help, there seems to be a real inability in politics at the moment for people to say, I fundamentally disagree with your stance, but I respect your point of view.
Well, in that sense, then, of respectful debate and sort of trying to think about these immensely difficult issues, we all have internal conscious and unconscious biases. How did you try to address that yourself in this major report that you delivered? I mean, some time ago now, but I wonder how you went about thinking about it.
Well, I think that from childhood, I've dealt with a kind of, totally irrational racism. And what that taught me was that people need to understand other people of differing backgrounds before they can pass judgment. You can't do it just on appearance. You can't just do it on political stance. And I've spoken to many organisations about anti-racism, and I'll say, look, it's often portrayed as a white v black issue, but I know there's racism within the races, and there's racism within people that you would identify as having the same racial characteristics, but they might be different tribe, speak a different language. You might find that if there's a boxing match, you'll support the person who looks most like you, which is irrational. If the commentator then goes on to explain that the one you're not supporting shares your politics and the one you are supporting is diametrically opposed, then you probably change your allegiance. All I'm asking people to do is to just pause for a moment, give people a chance, and then pass judgment based upon facts rather than appearance. Okay,
this could be a huge issue for the Labour Party. They are 20 points ahead in the polls. This may well be the next government in the UK. You have talked about this kind of factionalism, the difficulty of coming, of coming together and having a civilised debate and understanding people's different perspectives. I mean, is there Is there a worry then? You've talked about racism, but also anti-Semitism, misogyny and other forms of discrimination. Is that going to be an issue for this political party that may well end up in number 10?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think these are issues really for the nation as a whole, and surprisingly endemic attitudes, particularly around misogyny. I mean, we had some fairly stark things said to us by female members of the party. As I said, I think there's the need for respectful debate is something, particularly Baroness Lister was very keen to look at cultural change, but it appears to have fallen pretty much on deaf ears. And maybe this is the wake-up call that the party need, because there's nothing more unattractive to an electorate than a factually divided party. And it also means you fail democracy if you're in opposition, because you're so busy infighting, you're not providing effective opposition. And I think that's been a problem for far too long. Even if you're a natural Tory supporter, you would still like an effective opposition to hold the government to account. And certainly among our younger electorate, I think they're completely turned off by factionalism in politics, and there are certain kind of aspects of short-termism around things like infrastructure, education, health, which are, talking to young people, they think this should all be above politics, really. These are vital services that we need to provide regardless of who's in power. And I do find that sort of going into Westminster a bit, as I have done recently, I mean, I was never a political animal as such. It's a very strange atmosphere, the House of Commons. And I just wonder how close the politicians are to their electorate. I find at times there are things that are said and done which make me feel that there isn't a real understanding of how people lead their ordinary lives.
OK, well, the distance between Westminster and the nation, an issue as we head towards the 2024, probably, general election. Martin Forde KC, great to have you on the programme. Thank you for sharing your insights. We're going to go back now to Alex Wickham. We promised we would. You were listening to that conversation, Alex. What did you make of it?
A really interesting thing that Martin Forde was talking about was this idea that could be a perception, and Keir Starmer is in danger of there being a perception that rather than that he wants to solve anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it's that he is presiding over a factional divide in the Labour Party between essentially the right of the Labour Party and the left of the Labour Party. So Martin Forde brought up these examples of Diane Abbott and Kate Osamore, who've been very quickly disciplined by Keir Starmer's Labour Party for comments that they've made. There's another one, Andy MacDonald, a left-wing Labour MP, very quickly had the book thrown at him for a comment that he made about Israel-Palestine. Now, the Labour Party's gut reaction with Azza Ali was to defend him, and they tried to do that for 24, 36 hours. Is that because they thought his comment wasn't that bad, or it was out of context, or it was out of character? Or is it because Azza Ali is not on the left of the Labour Party as traditionally seen? And there is a danger for Keir Starmer that he's sort of being seen to be taking part in this sort of factional game rather than just making honest and quick judgments.
And do you think that the unity in the Labour Party is just a mirage because they've got such a poll lead? Is your analysis that actually, after the election, if they were to win, that image of unity, if there is one, would just fall away?
Well, it's certainly the case that, Keir Starmer, his advisors, they brag about how they have essentially purged the very left wing of the Labour Party from certainly any prominent roles. They've got rid of the people that they see as sort of very left wing cranks, the people who were causing the problems under Jeremy Corbyn. But the problem is that this isn't just left-wing people complaining about Starmer's handling of the last few days. There are people within the shadow cabinet. There are people, high up in the party who are saying, "Come on, we need to get a grip of this. We shouldn't have allowed the £28 billion mess to drag on for that long. We shouldn't have allowed the Azza Ali mess to drag on for as long as it did, the 48 hours that it did. We should have made quick political judgments that this is a problem, deal with it." And we haven't done that. And so it is a wider problem. And you're seeing, even before the election, you're seeing heavy internal criticism.
Our thanks to our senior UK government reporter Alex Wickham then for being with us and discussing our interview with Martin Forde KC. That's it from us for today. Thank you for listening, and if you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Maruful Hussain. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.